By way of introduction, my name is Rob Oglesby. I'm the Executive Director for the California Energy Commission, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today to provide an update of the progress that we've made on the California Clean Energy Jobs Act, also known as Proposition 39. I have with me a real expert on the program, Liz Schrock, who works on it every day and will be able to answer the more detailed questions, but I at least will be providing you with an overview of the program and kind of a status report. I want to start by reviewing a timeline of the steps that we took to kick this program off quickly. It was our mandate to get it up and going very quickly. The status of the funds that have been expended to date by the type of educational facility, as well as how it's been dispersed. And then I'll spend a little bit of time and go very quickly with the process that we have followed and that the LEAs have to follow in order to apply for funds, as well as some of the typical projects that are being funded with these funds, and then we'll have some time for questions. So, as mentioned earlier, the Clean Energy Jobs Act was approved by the voters in November of 2012 and allocated up to $55 million in projected revenues to fund the programs. It took until June of 2013 for the implementing legislation and the budget to be passed. And several state agencies were assigned roles in implementing the program, and they will also testify, and they're displayed on the slide here, testify after me. I won't go into their particular roles, but I wanted to acknowledge that they're queued up and have a significant piece of implementation of the program. The Energy Commission is the lead agency responsible for establishing the program guidelines and implementing the K-12 program. This program funds energy efficiency and renewable energy projects for local educational agencies, which I'll be calling LEAs throughout the rest of the presentation. And these are grants to public school districts, charter schools, county offices of education, and 3 state special schools. We review the application, we approve the application, and notify the Department of Education, and they cut the checks to the school districts. In addition, the Energy Commission also received $54 million over the course of 2 fiscal years in Prop 39 funding for Energy Conservation Assistance Act, also called ECA, which provides zero-interest loans. I'll just mention that briefly. It's not the full scope of the hearing here, but it is funded through Prop 39 resources. The other program areas include the Community College Chancellor's Office for Community College Districts, the Conservation Corps, which provides support work, employing adults that do surveys and other support services and evaluating the sites that ultimately are eligible for funding. And the California Workforce Development Board, which has its own grant program for training and also is responsible for keeping the numbers on jobs associated with the program. Finally, we have there is the Citizens Oversight Board, which examines expenditures from the Job Creation Fund, and it reviews our activities and provides program performance annual independent audits and submits evaluation of the program to the legislature. And we will have a representative from the Oversight Board also here today. So let me move to the timeline. I have a few slides on this, but I think it's good to point out that the program begins with the passage of the proposition and the implementation, but the final projects extend out to June 30th, 2021. So we're really looking at the first 2.5 years, say, of an 8-year program, and that has gotten off the ground very quickly. So our part of the program, the K-12 program, began 6 months after the governor signed enabling legislation, including the budget, SB 73. And as soon as the budget was approved and the implementing legislation was approved, the Energy Commission began a public process to get input for drafting and designing the program. We did statewide outreach efforts, included 5 public meetings throughout the state, 3 webinars. We had over 500 participants, 180 docket submittals, and in December of that year, we adopted the program guidelines to launch the program. Once the guidelines were adopted, in January 14th, we launched the K-12 program, releasing the Prop 39 funding applications, a handbook, energy savings calculators. We established an electronic submission process. We trained Energy Commission staff, provided 10 training seminars and 2 webinars, reaching over 800 LEAs statewide so that they can participate in the program. And we established a Prop 39 hotline to be able to answer questions. We actually received the first applications in February of 2014, and by the end of June 2014, 33 were approved, totaling $16 million in that first tranche of funding. The Energy Commission prepared and adopted the first guideline revisions in June 2014, making program adjustments for charter school requirements. You'll hear more about charter schools in a little bit, but I wanted to remind the members that during the budget process, we committed to putting out a solid program in the early years, in the first year of the program, and then revisiting it and tuning up as needed, and we've done that on a couple of occasions to deal with things that we gained from our learning experience in running the program. In the second fiscal year, the Energy Commission continued to fast-track the program and fine-tune the program further by adopting other revisions and improving the program. We streamlined and deployed an online application system. By the end of June, over 400 applications were approved, totaling $257 million of projects. In the fall of 2015, just this past fall, the Energy Commission developed and deployed a reporting module to our online application, which allows LEAs to easily submit the required annual progress reports and the final completed projects reports, which are going to be essential in keeping tabs on progress made by the LEAs in actual doing and constructing the projects. The LEAs began reporting in November of this past year, with reports due in December. LEAs will continue to report each year to the end of the program. I want to go to the ECA program next. Again, I mentioned that we had $54 million that were approved for this loan program. It provides zero-interest loans for energy projects, LEAs, and community colleges. $5.4 million was also allocated to our Bright Schools program, which is a complementary program and does audits, energy audits, helps school districts determine which projects they need to go forward on. To date, $41.4 million has been approved for 27 loans, and $4.6 million is encumbered through the Bright School program for those assessments. Now let me talk about the main feature of the program that the Energy Commission implements, and it's the K-12 program. And these are the energy efficiency projects and clean energy installation, basically solar and renewables, grant funding to local educational agencies. There are 2,136 eligible LEAs in the K-12 program, and of course that includes multiple school sites for each school district. In the first 3 fiscal years of the program, the K-12 program area was allocated $973 million. This slide that you see here with the pie charts illustrates the number of LEAs by type on the left and their share of the funding pie on the right. You'll see that public school districts receive 80% of the total allocated funds, and charter schools get about 19%. There's a lot more charter schools in number, but proportionately the public school districts, which have numerous schools within the districts, receive most of the funding. This slide and the following 3 slides highlight the funding status for each category. This slide highlights public school districts. The majority of the approved funds have been for public school districts, with $458 million awarded for energy projects and $112 million for planning funding. Moving to charter schools. Charter schools have the second most energy projects approved, with $45 million, remembering that their slice of the pie is much smaller than public schools LEAs. With $45 million approved Prop 39 funding applications, about 9% of the Energy Commission's approved plans. It's important to note the differences between public school districts and charter schools, because these differences affect their participation rates. Many of the public school districts are just plain larger. They have more staff, more facilities, and they have more experts in-house that they can bring to bear on designing the projects and assessing what projects are the best for their school sites and facilities. Charter school districts tend to be smaller. One of the other challenges about charter school districts is that many of them are in leased facilities. So we're talking about making improvements to real estate. And so in addressing charter schools, one of the challenges is to administer the funds to benefit the charter school districts that may be in a facility owned by a landlord with varying degrees of length of the leases, and also with also varying degrees of success. Charter schools also have more openings and closures as overall. So we should talk about that. But that explains one reason. They have a harder time getting started. They're a harder fit. The Energy Commission has adapted the guidelines so that they recognize these distinctions in the charter school structure, but they're still lagging in terms of the percentage of funds that have had some uptake to fund projects. The next category I want to talk about are the county offices of education, with $4.2 million in approved energy projects and $3 million in planning funding. This is about 1% of the energy projects funded to date. And finally, the fourth category is state special schools, and there's 3 of them. These schools provide comprehensive educational program for students who are blind, visually impaired, or deaf. These 3 LEAs have combined allocation of $300,000 to date. All 3 schools are in the final stages of planning, with energy audits nearly completed. All 3 anticipate submitting applications for the funding of this spring. Now, for all categories, we've actively reached out to all of the LEAs identified as not participating in the program. We've had emails, we've had direct phone calls, we've offered them individualized assistance and to help them understand the program and to navigate the program. So we've touched everyone directly. So let me do a recap here with the overall funding status. To date, the largest amount of funding, 52%, has funded energy project implementation. This represents 720 approved applications totaling $507. As the program is still in the early stages of the program implementation, the proportion dedicated to project construction will grow as more LEAs complete the planning process and submit project funding applications. LEAs can only request planning funding in their first year of program eligibility. So, and planning is really important. When you're looking at installing energy efficiency projects or clean energy projects, you want to make sure you spend your money wisely. It's technical. So beginning with a plan is a good idea. But over time, the project funding is going to dwarf the amount of funds that have invested in planning to date. So I also wanted to provide a snapshot of the distribution of funding throughout the state. We've talked about the types of educational institutions that have received funding, but this map, and I apologize for it being as small as it is, but it gives you an idea of the distribution of funds. So I'm going to read the code for you, since this is a bit of an eye chart. Counties in green indicate that more than 20 applications were approved. Blue represents the range of 10 to 19. Orange represents 1 to 9, and the yellow indicate no application has been approved and in some cases received. The total,
Senator Canella would like to interject.
Yeah, just on this graph, because I look at my district and I see a lot that are 1 to 9, and they're very high poverty areas. So can we do better outreach? It sounds like you've done a great job reaching out, but there's some that are maybe it's doing better than they're participating obviously at a larger clip than other areas. Can we do a better job reaching out to some of these schools, or maybe that's not a fair question, or how can we do a better job reaching out to some of these? How can I do a better job?
We've done a lot, but we'd be happy to partner with you. If you want to join with us to promote the program in your district, we would be happy to partner with you or anyone else. As I said, we've got websites, training sessions, we've done outreach, and we've done individual calls to each of the administrator, or to the administrators that would be eligible to apply for the program in all of these LEAs. So
I'll have my office contact yours because
Yeah.
it's just such an opportunity for these school districts to set themselves up for many years.
Yeah, I think it's great, and we shouldn't be leaving any money on the table when it comes, because this is saving them money, and it's also making more healthful and comfortable classrooms as well.
And I just also want to call attention to some of the counties that don't have, or in the yellow, are counties that have very low populations. We have some counties that have just above 1,000 people. So you probably can imagine that there are not a lot of facilities there. And if they don't have facilities, there's really nothing to improve. But those districts are also tend to be low tax districts and often don't have the funds to apply. So we have to also consider that as well. So I think it'll be important for the representatives of the Senate here that represent those counties to reach out and communicate to the legislature in terms of how do we address those worked-in inequities into the system. So I just want to point that out. If there's a possibility that we can, this is where, this committee can provide some insight as to how to do that.
Well, Chair Huesa, you make some very valid points, and if I could, I'll zoom in on those a little bit and provide some additional things for the committee to chew on as we think about ways to improve participation in the outreach. So there's 5 yellow shaded counties. And the total number of school district LEAs in these 5 counties is 24, which supports your comments. Tuolumne County has the most at 15. For Tuolumne County, the cost effectiveness is the barrier because they have extremely low electric rates. They have access to low hydro, predominantly power that has been there for a long time, and their energy agreements they've benefited from that and continue to benefit from that for a long time. But we're working with that county and 2 other rural counties, Calaveras and Trinities, that also get those very favorable energy rates to see what we can do to put some more to access the program funds in those areas. So that's another complicating factor. And then I'll mention in some of the other areas of the states, another challenge is some school districts have already installed solar. And for those school districts that have installed solar, doing additional work when the electricity rate is very, very low because they've covered it with solar, and we have to look at other projects that still makes sense, because our requirement is that the projects be cost effective, result in net savings.
Could you give us a list of those counties? I mean,
Absolutely,
clearly
absolutely. The ones that yeah, and it's
that have already hit the bar and there's nowhere else to go.
yeah, it's not that many,
not cost-effective.
but they're in there. So we will be happy to do
If
that.
that's easy to do, I'd really like to see that.
Yeah, I'll provide that to the
Mine is
committee.
pretty low
Yeah.
concern.
So let me just take a quick review of how these projects are encountered by the LEAs and what the steps are, and I'll skim over this pretty quickly. It begins, of course, with an application to us. We've already done electronic applications. We've made it as simple as we can, as convenient as we can. We even have some low-hanging fruit type projects where on our site you've got the calculator that allows you to pick projects if they fit your needs that take very little consultant effort, easy projects, if you will.
Chairman, can I ask a question? Can you provide that to us? 'Cause I'd like to see the actual interface. One of the great challenges I've seen in government is that we come up with these great ideas that look good in a press release and the like, but what is it like for the ordinary person and have to apply? So this is great news that you're doing this, because you got to hire an army of consultants, usually most of people who just got out of a government, who then get hired for a lot of money to then go and implement these policies. And so the challenge for us especially in these more rural counties, as when they don't have the resources, to make it as simple. So I just want to suggest that, because I think that in my experience of 40 years in this whole energy space, that has been the biggest problem.
Absolutely, we'd be more than happy to provide that. And some of the allocations for some of the districts were small dollar amounts.
Yeah.
And so in order not to chew up the funds on consultants and other things, we do have a process where you can do the easy project list. And that was kind of designed with those types of districts in mind.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a follow-up question on this too, real quickly? Okay? Sure. Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Number one is, this chart shows that, first of all, we have our LAO report that indicates Prop 39 was passed in November of 2012. Here it says project construction for 4 years. What I want to understand is that all of these numbers and stuff are things along, and then we see the allocation of what kind of projects. First question is, what is actually on the ground operating today versus counted in a pipeline? Do you have a chart that will show it to us? Because you have a slide here that says that the end of this year is when the report comes out after the first 4 years. So how much of this is real and how much of it's stuff that's pending?
Okay, well, let me be a spoiler here. Most of it is in the pipeline. This has been around for 2.5 years.
Right, that's my question.
And completed projects, a number, I'll give you some data at the very end, but the completed projects are relatively small. We also require a year's worth of data collection because we are reporting on the effectiveness of the projects being done. The annual reports, we have, let me come to that at the end of the meeting, and I'll give you the numbers at the end.
Well, I have it, well, it's very important. Yeah, so one, what's actually been done versus, because my big challenge in so much of this is we talk about all this green stuff, and we talk about how great we are. What has been the real impact, point one. Point two is we made a public policy decision because it looked good to give this stuff to schools. Is this, in your judgment, the fastest? Because at the end of the day, the environment is agnostic as to where the pollution comes from, as long as we reduce GHGs and improve the environment, whether it comes from a public facility or a private facility. So if your objective, your real objective is environmental, is this the best place we could have put this? Because if you've got all of these observations, all of this time, 4 years. If I just sat and told you what has changed in the last 4 years in the environmental space on a global basis, the world is completely different in terms of what kind of technologies, the smart meters that have been installed, the new technologies that interface, the Nest, the this, all of these things. So here it is, we've made a choice to say we're going to take a tax revenue and employ it here because it's good. And is this question I asked, the second question is, in your judgment, it being agnostic, because of course we support education, but this is combining education with environmental policy. Is that the best use in terms of time-wise? And the last issue, because you could have made other choices to deploy these dollars, which I think is pretty critical. And then the last question I wanted to ask, and you can ask this later in your presentation, is: are we if in fact your utility bills are going down at a school, and those utility bills are paid for out of a school budget, whether the property tax bill or Prop 98, is this something where we're supplementing education? Because is the savings now using to repay back the cost, or is the savings going directly to the bottom line to give more money available to schools, so that what this is that you've got Prop 98 that's guarantees appropriately, we all support, and then you also have the school bonds that I worked on for many, many years, which, as I think about it now, we're paying $2.3 billion a year to pay for schools that would normally have gone out of the property tax or Prop 98, but we're using the general fund money. Now we have this general fund money. The last question is this going to, as a third supplement, to help pay for the cost of education?
Senator, I think you made your question so exact, I think you answered your own question there.
I don't know the answer to it. I think it is.
You came real close to answering it.
Well, if I miss one of the questions, remind me, because I want to make sure I give you complete
Only 3.
answers.
I can come up with more.
You asked, your first question, as I recall, was whether this was the best bang for the buck, basically, for these tax revenues. And I guess I would remind the committee that at the time that this was being considered, there was intent behind the proposition, which guided it to a degree. There was an intent of the legislature that was developed over time as the enabling legislation. So the program was focused by the legislature. And in that process, the legislature recognized that there are multiple benefits that could be derived from the use of these funds, and that some of the benefit that was sought from the expenditure of Prop 39 funds was not solely environmental. It was a job, but was also to address critically neglected infrastructure in our public school system that had lagged in support over years.
That's true. I mean, are you just making that up? I'm serious. We just spent $113 billion, the biggest investment over a period of 10 years in school construction in the history of America. You know, fundamentally changing schools, building new schools. I just don't think that's I mean, it sounds good politically, but I can't imagine you really believe that. You really do, personally?
So you focused on building new schools?
You said infrastructure problem in schools. This is an issue of efficiencies.
So during the years of the recession, which weren't that far along, far away, there was a lot of deferred maintenance done at schools. There was a lot of lack of improvement at schools. I'll let the educational agencies speak for themselves, but the types of
By the way, we'll have them next.
and the types of projects that we're funding, the types of projects we're funding are infrastructure 101. I mean, they're replacing inefficient HVAC systems, a lighting system that are wasting energy, and in other cases, we're helping them reduce their energy expenditures through solar and installations on the school site. You also asked whether these are grants, except for the 54.
On the bang for buck question, you didn't answer it. You just said that this was the policy of the legislature.
I said there are multiple policies. The types of projects that school districts are undertaken are decided by the school districts. Our criteria is that they have to meet a basic cost effectiveness calculation. We didn't rank them in terms of it's not a competitive design program where we would rank the projects based on the most return on the dollar by design. We basically had the school districts decide the projects that made the most sense for them.
There's an oversight here. I want to probe just a little bit more, Mr. Chairman. The last question here, and that is, your Energy Commission. I got that. I'm asking a different question. Let's assume we did all the low-income housing facilities in the state, and that was the highest and best use. I understand the legislature. This is a hearing where we're sitting there saying, did we make the right policy changes? Can we course correct? Should we continue to do this? Is it the smartest and best thing? I'm asking you as an Energy Commission representative, not someone who's advocating for schools or interpreting our position that the legislature appropriately took. I wouldn't have disagreed. I'm just probing it because that's our job. My question is, you know, maybe if we sat and took all this money and improved the water system, the moving of water, and made that more efficient, and put solar over all the various canals. I'm just thinking, and if those are deliverables, how do you get the most number of jobs? How do you get the reduced GHGs the greatest? Because to me, that was the cornerstone, and the like.
Okay. Let me, stepping away from this program and more broadly.
Buck for buck.
Well, stepping away from this particular program and speaking more broadly on where investments could be made for substantial gains, we have existing buildings throughout the state that are a large proportion that easily could be upgraded. Now, our new buildings, through the rules that have been implemented statewide related to energy efficiency, are very efficient and headed to being even more efficient. Our appliances and the things we plug in, we're making headway on those so that there's more progress to be done. But the lowest hanging fruit, where you get the most bang for the buck, is investing in energy efficiency in existing buildings. And we have a 758 report, a report that was completed last year, which discusses this in some detail. I'd be happy to send to your office so we can parse that out. In SB 350, we were assigned with sister agencies to tackle that, to develop a plan and tackle that, and we can we'll be talking about the resources and how to do that going forward over the course of this year. But that reaches beyond schools and to public funds that might be invested to improve energy efficiency on a much broader base than what this program's about. But having said that, within this program, clearly part of the existing buildings that have challenges and where you can get cost-effective energy reductions are in the existing schools as part of that stock. But it's a subset of a much broader and many times larger universe of existing structures, existing homes, existing commercial facilities, which have not been improved and which could easily be improved to make them more energy efficient.